Just a quick note before we start, I had a laser hair removal session yesterday that has left my face feeling really sore, which means goodbye makeup, hello dysphoria, but I wanted to get this video up while the book is fresh on my mind, and it's a really good book. The Last House on Needless Street by Katrina Ward is a fascinating horror thriller that really had me thinking and rethinking again and again, just as any good thriller should. Fun story, I first saw this book in a bookshop about a year ago when it first came out in paperback, and I thought for ages it was called The Last House on Needle Street. Which I still think is a better name than Needless Street, because Needless Street is really hard to say. And I also know I'm not the only person who thought that as well, so if I am an idiot, I'm not the only idiot. Anyway, The Last House on Needless Street, as I said, is a horror thriller. Now, I read a lot of horror books. I also read a lot of murder mysteries, especially by Agatha Christie. And typically, wrong-footing the reader through unreliable narrators or twisting time and perspective can only work for so long, and I often think maybe there's a finite number of ways that you can twist and deceive the mind of the reader. But The Last House on Needless Street proved me wrong. This book really made me stumble multiple times. We begin with a man called Ted. He's in his 30s and he lives a very isolated, reclusive life in the last house on Needless Street, which is somewhere in the US. A small suburban neighborhood near a lake. At the very beginning, we find out that Ted was a suspect in the murder or kidnapping of a girl who went missing one day at the lakeside. The girl vanished, Ted's house was raided, and nothing came of it. He was cleared of any suspicion. That was 11 years ago. To the day. And now we find out that Ted lives with his daughter, who is around the age of 10, 11, and his cat. And he also says right at the beginning that his daughter and his cat don't get along. We don't know anything about the girl's mother, but Ted only has her sometimes, and periodically she leaves the house, and so we assume, well, she goes home to her mother. Ted and the woman are separated. But Ted's narrative, Ted's character, it's all written in a way that suggests that Ted is mentally ill, traumatized, disturbed, maybe has some neurodiversity. It's not particularly clear, but he's written in a way that kind of makes him sound a bit like a child, kind of like Forrest Gump, where you can't really define what makes his mind unique, but there's something. He doesn't quite narrate his life as an adult. The way he talks and describes things, the way he lives his life, it all feels a little too creepy and childish, but very non-specific. We don't know what mental health issues he has, what neurodiversity, whatever. We don't know. We just know that Ted seems a bit off. And so you do immediately wonder, how does he have a child? Who's the child's mother? The child herself, Lauren, is difficult. They argue a lot. He seems to homeschool her, or at least get her to do her own homework, and they argue over that quite a lot. Then, very soon after we're introduced to Ted and Lauren, we get a chapter from his cat Olivia's perspective. Olivia is charming and funny. She refers to all humans as Teds, but her Ted is capitalized, and then every other Ted is lowercase Ted. And so every human is a Ted, but she has her own Ted. She's also a gay cat who has a crush on a tabby that she sees walking past through the window every day, which is such a curious thing to include. At least that's what you think at the beginning. The house is almost entirely boarded up, and Lauren and Olivia both look through little slats in the wood. And you wonder, okay, why has Ted boarded up his house? Why would Lauren's mother be okay with sending her to a guy who boards up his windows and has a cat that Lauren hates? You get a lot of questions very early on. Now, of course, right from the beginning, you're supposed to think that Lauren perhaps is the kidnapped child grown up a little bit. Perhaps there is no mother. Perhaps Ted kidnapped her and turned her into his daughter. And if that's the case, where does she go? When he says, right, it's time to go, I'll see you in a few days, it doesn't actually mention going home to a mother. She just goes somewhere. And all of this is very clearly laid out from the beginning to make you wonder. Then we get introduced to our third protagonist. You've got Ted the human, Olivia the cat, and Dee. Dee is the sister of one of several girls that have gone missing at that lakeside. Dee has spent the last 10 plus years investigating what happened to her sister, Lulu. Dee has been on this trail for a long time. She is very close to a police detective who she frequently checks in with, and they kind of work together, but the police detective is obviously shit at their job and tired of it all, while Dee just keeps farming for clues and chasing leads and won't give up and insists that Lulu is still alive and Dee is going to find her. And then pretty soon into the book, Dee moves to Needless Street. She moves into a house on the street and is sure that Ted is actually the culprit. Even though he was cleared of all charges and nothing was found, she believes that he killed, or hopefully and more likely is still in possession of Lulu, and perhaps Lauren is Lulu. I believe Lulu was short for Laura. You've got Laura, Lauren, very similar names. So all of this is leading to a very predictable conclusion. But you know that this can't be what's going on. We can't just be following in the mind of a kidnapper. It's too obvious. It's all been laid out for us. Especially the fact that Ted's mind isn't quite right. He is childish. He's unemployed. He's boarded up his windows. It's too obvious. So then you start to think, okay, what are the alternatives? What's really going on? And I thought a few different things. And then I started to wonder, well, maybe it is Occam's razor. Maybe that's exactly what's going to happen, and there will just be some sort of a showdown between Ted and Dee over Lauren's fate. But as you go on, you start to learn things about Lauren that feel strange. Now, I've obviously finished the book. I'm trying to recount the thoughts and feelings and confusion that I had along the way without actually giving anything away. Now, the book's about 350 pages long, and I think it was around page 200 that I came up with a theory about what was going on. Now, this is not spoiling anything to say that the ending comprises about 3 twists. I think there are 3 twists at the end, 3 reveals, and I did guess one of them around page 200. I had this crazy idea, and I thought, yeah, this makes sense, and it turns out that, yeah, it did make sense, and I was right. But that was one of 3 twists, so I guessed one of them. And then there were 2 others that still took me by surprise. Aside from all the twisting and turning and playing mind games with the reader, this also just remains a very, very clever story. It's also wonderfully atmospheric. It almost entirely takes place on Needless Street, in this house that's all boarded up, so it has a kind of gothic horror feel to it. And although it's mostly a thriller, because you've got this whodunit aspect, what did they do, who is the culprit, where is the victim, all of this. It's very grounded in realism, so it feels like a thriller. There are a lot of truly frightening horror moments, and there are actually a few moments of what I'm going to call body horror, a few gross moments, where there is some blood, there is some torture, there is physical horror. And that feeling of oppression and isolation and claustrophobia is really powerful. For example, Olivia the cat likes to sleep in a disused chest freezer. The lid is left open, and the freezer box is lined with some blankets for Olivia to sleep in. And you think, well, this chest freezer is going to come into play. It's like a Chekhov's gun. And that is enough to kind of send a shiver down your spine. How is this disused freezer going to play into the narrative later on? And just feeling apprehensive about that at the beginning, wondering where it's going to lead, put me on edge. Just the fact that I'm spending time in a house with boarded up windows made me shudder. And also the fact that there is a child, at least sometimes, in this house with boarded up windows made me feel sad and frightened for her. I was concerned. So the horror runs deep in a lot of different ways. There are moments that are just very visceral, frightening moments of physical horror, pain, blood, but there's also Clearly a lot of trauma going on here. Possibly abuse. Ted kind of talks and thinks like someone who was abused, and we periodically get flashbacks into his childhood. He must have had some awful relationship with his mother, who is occasionally mentioned, and we even get flashbacks to her at certain moments. And once again, I've finished this, so I know all this stuff. But this is how I was feeling as I was reading it, trying to piece all of this together. Dee is a character that kind of grounds us, because she seems so headstrong. She is pushing the narrative forward as we, the reader, are investigating what's going on and wondering what's going on and trying to understand it, and Dee is doing exactly the same. Dee also flashes us back to the day that her sister went missing, and the fact that it was kind of her fault for not keeping an eye on her sister, and so there's definitely a bit of guilt, or a lot of guilt, that feeds her journey to figuring out what happened and hopefully finding Lulu alive. And Ted is also creepy as all hell. There's a lot that makes him a very frightening and intimidating person, but you also kind of wonder, should I be feeling sorry for him? Should I be concerned for him? And the book asks you to do that to a point, while also making it difficult to do that, based on his behavior and his feelings, and the fact that you're mostly concerned for Lauren. And Olivia the cat. And by the way, Olivia is a narrator all the way through this. Every chapter is just titled Ted, Olivia, or Dee. So we're always getting a narrative from Ted's perspective, Olivia the cat, and Dee. Now, Ted and Olivia, as far as I remember, are written in the first person, while Dee is in the third. I think I'm remembering that right. And that, I think, is a curious choice, because with Dee kind of being almost an audience surrogate, we are investigating, and so is Dee. For Dee to be written in the third person to create a little bit of distance from her while we are suffocated inside the minds of Ted and his cat, that's a curious thing to do, and clearly was done intentionally, which I find fascinating. The fact that you do stumble and are wrong-footed again and again and again all the way through this book is a testament to its success. Wait, does that sentence make sense? Oh, whatever. After reading so many murder mysteries and horror novels and whodunits, you kind of think, can this take me by surprise? Can this twist my mind? Can this wrong-foot me? I'm probably going to figure out what's going on earlier than the author would like. And I'm not sure if I did or not, because as I said, I guessed 1 in 3 twists. But also, I don't like the idea that the whole reason that you read a thriller or a murder mystery is to figure out who done it. I can't help but try to do that as I read, to try and figure out what the hell is going on, what's a red herring, what's not, what's really happening, and come up with all kinds of fun theories. Yeah, I can't help but do that. But also, my main purpose, and I think most readers' main purpose when reading this, should be to read a good piece of fiction. And The Last House on Needless Street is a very good piece of fiction, a fantastic horror thriller novel. So figuring out what's really going on is something you're going to try and do as you read it, but it isn't really the point. The point is to just read a really good story. But Catriona Ward knows that you're going to try, all the way through. I did. And I'd be curious to see what you figured out and what you didn't, and just whether or not you enjoyed this book. If you like horror books and thrillers, and I typically don't like thrillers, especially political ones, police dramas, all that shit, it's not my thing. But something that mixes horror and thriller together, absolutely. There are a lot of films, video games, and books that do that I've enjoyed. And The Last House on Needless Street is really high up there when it comes to the fantastic blending of horror and thriller. A wonderful book, really, really good to read around Halloween. Subscribe for books.